Welcome to the Deep Specialization Podcast, the show where we blend focus, strategy, and client intimacy in order to scale and simplify our businesses and our lives. I'm your host, Corey Quinn. Let's jump into the show. Today, I'm joined again by the CEO of Testimonial Hero, Sam Shepler. Welcome, Sam.
Thanks, Corey. It's great to be here. I really appreciate you having me back on for round two.
Yes, you're the first guest on this show who's been invited back. So you must have done something well the first time.
Truly an honor, and
Yeah.
a longtime listener as well. So yeah, really appreciate it.
That's awesome. So kind of jumping into where we left off. Well, actually, before we do that, let's give the listeners a little bit of context about you and Testimonial Hero, the work you do. So what could you share about that?
Yeah. So Testimonial Hero, my agency, we are a tech-enabled marketing firm focused on all things customer stories. So essentially, we help B2B companies easily create video testimonials, written case studies, and all other essential customer collateral so they can generate more leads, accelerate their sales cycle, and hopefully drive revenue faster. So very much living that that deep specialization, life that I think, we talk about so much on this show, right? Is that, we're specializing in a specific problem that we want to solve, as well as, a vertical too. We actually do, we have a few different verticals, but I would say we're most deeply entrenched in B2B software and technology.
Yeah. And I love that. I love that you have become dedicated to solving this problem of customer stories for businesses. How long has the business been around? What could you share about the number of employees or clients or revenue or anything that you're comfortable sharing?
Absolutely. So I started the company in 2018, the beginning of 2018. Before that, I also ran a generalist video agency for about 4 years. So it's kind of like a continuation of everything I've learned in running agencies. It wasn't my first agency, but this year we should do, 4, maybe 5 million in revenue top line. And yeah, that's probably safe to share.
Yeah, beautiful. And that's awesome. By the way, for listeners who are curious and going deeper into that backstory and the sort of the founder story behind Testimonial Hero, you could definitely tune in to the first episode. As you were describing the company, I noticed you just changed the tone, or not the tone, but let's say the scope of the problems you solve. And I'd love to dig into that. I know you had just announced an acquisition of a company called Case Study Buddy. Tell us about the acquisition and why that made sense for your vision for your company.
So with Testimonial Hero, we originally really thought of ourselves, as a video testimonial agency. And because that was my background was, video, right? But over the course of the past couple of years, we realized, at the end of the day, our customers are hiring us to solve a problem. And, that problem is essentially getting customer stories to get that credibility they need to, build trust and close deals faster. And there's varying ways to solve that problem. So we basically realized we really shouldn't be precious about, our solution, right? Just because I'm a video guy, I don't want to be precious about video, even though I love video. I just started to get more excited to attack the problem in a way that most benefited our customers. And there is a written component to that. So that was really our goal with the acquisition of Case Study Buddy, was to be able to skip years of, building up a new, written business unit and be able to solve that problem for our customers, kind of medium or format agnostic.
Sure. And at what point in the, let's say, 5 or 6 years of Testimonial Hero, where I imagine at the beginning of the early days and the early years was focused exclusively on video testimonials as sort of that was the main focus as far as solving that problem of customer stories. When did you begin to open up, or what changed in you or in the business to help you to realize that, hey, we're not just a video testimonial company, we're a customer story company? What was the thing that caused you to that realization to click?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think it's at least two things. One is that we saw, you know, companies like Case Study Buddy having success and, driving revenue with that, with written content and written customer stories. So I think in the beginning, me being coming from a video background, I kind of always like wrote off, written content a little bit. And I was like, oh, no one reads anymore, which is a kind of nice trite thing to say, but it's not exactly true. It's way more nuanced than that in reality. And the fact is, like, I realized I was like, I need to get over myself and I need to get over my preconceived notions.
Yeah.
This is what customers want. We want to help customers. We need to, be in the space, right? So that's kind of, I would say, and that came from, seeing, the success of Case Study Buddy that and the traction that they had, and also hearing from our customers too. We just got to the point where, a lot of our customers were asking us like, oh, like, do you do written case studies? Or they would, we'd see them taking the transcript from our videos and doing it themselves internally, right? So, both from the perspective of just being able to capture more share of wallet from from our client and capture more value, and also just provide, a better service to the customer, be able to take more off their plate, which they appreciate. That was what it really drove the decision.
Beautiful. And why not just start up, as you mentioned, like a division where you're basically building that muscle in house versus acquire an existing company?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think we, build like we had this question is like, do we want to, start from scratch and figure this out on our own, or do we want to kind of hopefully skip some steps and, you know, go out there, acquire a company and just go ahead? I think for
Yeah.
me, just the idea that to move quickly, move faster is very appealing, and just kind of leapfrog the years of trial and error that we probably would have
Yeah.
spinning up a new service. So I think I think it was both like me having a healthy respect for like not how hard well, for, how hard a new medium frankly could be, right? And then also it's just a little bit of luck and timing too, because it's pretty hard to actually get any deals done. You have to have a willing seller and a willing buyer, which is it just like doesn't align often. And like it was something that, the timing actually aligned for both us as a buyer and for the seller. And actually, I had been, off and on, me and the founder of Case Study Buddy, there's two founders, Jen Enns and Joel Kletke, we had a great relationship throughout the years, even though we were technically, competitors in a lot of
Yeah.
respects. So like I had always, caught up with them every year or so, and this topic had been discussed before, and it just so happened that like it was finally, good timing for both of us, right? And I think that's like a interesting like, takeaway from the whole situation is that, even though we were, pretty much direct competitors, because they started doing video as well, the past couple of years. So like the past couple of years we were technically speaking directly competing with them.
Yeah.
I think both of us on both sides had a good, mutual respect for each other. And that's really what kind of set up the whole conversation and facilitated the whole deal happening. And I think a good takeaway from that is, for agency owners who want to do something like this is
Yeah.
basically, make sure you take a mindset of, co-opetition as much as possible instead of competition, right? Like
Sure.
can you cooperate with your competitors? Can you, I mean, obviously it's just like, it's both doing the right thing and just being a good human to, not be a dick to your competitors and just be respectful, but it's also, good business, right?
Yeah.
Because you never
Yeah.
know, like,
You never know.
when these
That's right.
opportunities will come up to either sell to a competitor or buy a competitor. And, the earlier you can start those relationships, I think the better. So I think it's really important, and that's definitely something in hindsight that naturally both parties did correctly, right? But it isn't always the case, right? Like sometimes people get really sometimes there can be a lot of animosity between competitors. But given that like your competitors are often your best partners or your best acquirers or your best acquisition targets, I think it's like really important to think about that.
Yeah. Did this, it sounds like based on how you're sharing this, it happened somewhat organically. It wasn't like you had some broker necessarily, or was it more of a formal process, or what was the process like to get this acquisition in motion?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I had it was I mean it was organic. We didn't yeah it was we didn't use there was no broker involved. I had reached out. I had posited this idea to them multiple times over the years. Frankly, like back then, it probably wasn't right for me either, right for Testimonial Hero, and it
Yeah.
wasn't right for them. But finally, we were just doing our annual check in, and it finally started to make sense for both parties. And yeah, that's kind of so it's more like an organic thing, and we were we were there and you know met all their criteria, especially around being able to provide continuity and great continued service to their
Yep.
customers,
That's
which
great.
was very important to them. So yeah, I think that's really was the key, that we just stayed in touch for years prior
Yeah.
to it.
As a result of this acquisition, does it impact your vertical focus on B2B? I also know you have a concentration of clients in cybersecurity.
Yeah, I think it strengthens our vertical focus further in B2B, and a lot of further, yeah, for sure, it's further market. It's really the benefits are like a lot even more market share in where we're trying to already be, essentially, and then that expanded service capability, and we
Yeah.
actually did one other acquisition this year as well. I can't talk about it as specifically due to the terms of the acquisition, because without going into too much detail, we basically acquired the company, which was another written case study company. We acquired it from a private equity company, and you know, basically, like it was more like a little bit more like behind the scenes. They understandably didn't want to like make too big a deal of it on their end. So that I can't. I probably that's probably all I can say for now, except for yeah, we did two acquisitions this year of written
Okay.
case study companies to
Yep.
really push further into that, solving that customer story problem and enabling that new service
Yeah.
for our clients.
Back when I was at Scorpion, we went through a period where we were acquiring companies. That was part of our growth strategy. And the thesis was, because we had a very operationally sound company, very streamlined, very process driven, we were able to acquire companies that had maybe specialization in a vertical market, but didn't maybe have the back office kind of optimization that we had built. And so we would take these companies, bring them in any event. The strategy was always we would acquire them and then bring them into our ecosystem, as well as change the brand to Scorpions. We would basically sunset the legacy brand and rebrand them as part of Scorpion. Are you now going to be managing three separate brands, or is the plan to have them all fall underneath the Testimonial Hero, or maybe a rebrand in your future as well?
The plan is to have them all fall under Testimonial Hero for
Okay.
sure. We're not in a rush. Well, we're moving as fast as reasonable to do that.
Yeah.
It wasn't like a day one thing. So for example, the Case Study Buddy site is still up and
I
still,
was just on it. I just
will
checked.
be.
Yep.
Yep. Still will be for, at least a couple months, probably, maybe a little less. Maybe we'll get around to it in the next 30 days or so. But for sure, yeah, because, we do want to put everything together into one brand, because at the end of the day, they're all focused on that same customer story
Yep.
niche. So there's no really reason to have like the messaging is all cohesive. So there's no reason to keep the brand separate, right? Versus if we acquired a company that did a completely different thing,
Right.
it might make sense to make it standalone, but it just makes so much sense to fold them all together because everything dovetails, and then that's just less complexity. Yeah.
That makes sense. So, under the umbrella of customer stories, you now have video testimonials as well as written case studies. What else exists underneath the customer story umbrella besides these two sort of channels?
Yeah, yeah, great question. So I think it's a lot sub nested under both of those things. So within, video testimonials, broadly, we have a number of different methodologies and, qualities and ways to capture video testimonials. So we have our premium remote video testimonials, which are very high quality remote testimonials that, we have a live person interviewing, and we have our in-person on-site video testimonials where we're sending videographers that we've, to actual offices, filming b-roll and all of that. And we do those everywhere in the world, with no travel fees. So that's pretty unique and
That's
differentiated
great.
there on the
Yeah,
on-sites. Yeah, and then we have, event video testimonials, asynchronous video testimonials. So like and then we have, employee testimonials, which is like for recruitment marketing. So there's like at least five, subcategories of video testimonials between the different use cases, the different qualities, the different prices, and the different kind of capture styles. And then on the written side, we have first person customer stories, which are more like a ghost written thought leadership article around, here's how I use Gong to, drive more results for, my sales team. And here's how you can learn from that. And by the way, like it's not all about Gong, but by the way, I use Gong, and, so it's like implicit social proof on written first person with more of like a thought leadership angle. And, we do that for Gong thanks to one of the acquisitions. So, and then there's of course the traditional third person case studies where it's more of that like challenge, solution, results, designed, one pager or, website thing where it's third person with some pull quotes. And then, also sales slides, social quote cards, so really runs the gamut. And then audiograms as well is something that we're doing more of. So yeah, it's there's just so many, and that doesn't even scratch the surface of different types of edits. So for every video testimonial, we're talking, that traditional kind of full story 90-second edit, but then there might be, probably a social media cut, an objection crusher edit focusing on one of the most common questions, fears, or doubts that the prospects have. Maybe there's a competitive replacement edit around like someone who switched to that client's solution from another solution. So it's crazy to the point that you always talk about. It's like people think like, oh, like if I specialize, there's not going to be that much to do. But it's like you just keep peeling back the onion, and there gets to be
yeah,
more, and you can just go so deep on the
yeah.
area.
I think, yeah, I mean, the road that you're going down based on our discussion here and previous discussions is that you're on a mission to be the best in the world at solving the problem of capturing and communicating customer stories. And that's a great thing to own.
But
It's a great real estate to own.
yeah, 100%. Yeah, we sometimes joke that like customer story world domination is like kind of like our
I love
unofficial
it.
mission.
That's a
It's
huge
not our
vision.
official mission, but
Yeah.
maybe our unofficial mission. Yeah.
There's a ton of need out there, which is beautiful. And so I love it. I think it's a great perspective. You also, in addition to now kind of being the CEO of your company, you've made these acquisitions. I know you also spend time helping founders. You do some one-on-one coaching, and I think that that's beautiful. I'm a big fan of coaching. What is your perspective on when a founder should reach out and really seek out coaching with a mentor?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think, so I've had a lot of, coaches and, mentors. That I've learned from. And actually, let me roll back and kind of, share some high level thoughts here. Like, I think like a lot of times in entrepreneurship, the advice people get is like, oh, you need like a mentor. And then everyone's like, okay, got it. Like, where do I find this mentor? Like, great. What's next? And like, no one really knows. And like,
You go to the mentor store.
yeah,
That's where
exactly.
you
Go
go.
to the mentor store. Like, and then kind of what I've seen is like the only people generally that are gonna like quote unquote mentor you for free are like retired people, which is great, but like I don't actually think, or like people that are like at the kind of later in their career that are like looking to give back or whatever. But like the thing is, the most valuable, in my experience, and I think frankly, just honestly, like the most valuable coaching and advising is from people who have done, what you want to do
Yeah.
and been where you want to go, like in, 3, 5, 6 like years, like you're like 3 to 6 years behind them, maybe, give or take a couple years, right? Like, and if someone's at the end of their career, or like so far ahead of you, like it's like almost like not helpful. Like Jeff Bezos, like if I went to Jeff Bezos, like he's so far ahead of me,
Yeah.
and like it's just like not even helpful, right? So like I think the sweet spot is like getting advice from people whose footsteps you want to follow in, that are in that like 3 to 5, 3 to 7 years ahead of you, but not so far ahead of you that they don't remember being in your shoes and like
Yeah.
the problems that you run into. Because the reality is like once you get much further ahead of that, I think it's just like there's so much hindsight bias, and people, we're humans, like we kind of forget like exactly what happened, right? But like if you
Yeah.
can get a mentor that's in that sweet spot of like several years ahead of you but not like decades ahead of you, you get the real answers,
Yeah.
and they remember what you're going through, and they can just be like, yep, I ran into that, here's exactly what we did, and
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
can solve that. So like I've and then so basically, yeah, I think like, and obviously it's like I think you in what you're doing are a great example of this, right? Like you 2 years ago were, yeah, practicing, living the life, like doing the damn thing, and now an agency owner has the opportunity to learn from you and what you did at Scorpion. It's like that is an opportunity that they like, obviously like I've done some coaching with you, and
Yeah.
like that's why I just like didn't even think twice. I was like, all right, I've I want to go where Corey's been. I'm just gonna like learn from him. And so yeah, I think I'm a big fan of that. And yeah, I think it's just like I like learning from people who haven't been coaches for decades,
Yeah.
or have like kind of recent experience. Not that
Yeah.
there aren't, especially on certain things. Like there are. It depends what you're trying to learn, right? Like, but I do think, especially for like like tactical execution, like how do we make this work? How do we make this make money? Like there's nothing that compares to learning from people who are like
Yeah.
deep in the trenches, or
Yeah.
recently, deep in the
Yeah.
trenches.
You can't get it from a book. I keep thinking as you're talking about this, like I went and saw one of my favorite authors, John C. Maxwell, who writes these amazing books, but it's all about principles, it's all about strategy. And that's different than the CEO or the coach who, as you said, just went through that and had a great result, but struggled along the way. It can give you both the sort of the principles as well as the tactics on
Yeah,
specifically what they did, and relate that to your situation. So I think that's
100%.
that's a great perspective for sure.
Yeah.
And
And to
so
get to your question around like why I do it, I mean,
yeah,
why do I do it? It's because I have a big golf habit, and this helps me justify like buying another club, or another. No, and that's what I tell my wife. I'm like, yeah, I'm buying some golf clubs. Don't worry, I'm doing a coaching call. It all offsets. No, in all seriousness, besides that, it's fun, and I like it, and I think it makes me sharper too for
yeah,
my own business too, because it just, yeah, like seeing other people's situations, like gives you some time to reflect. And I think it kind of makes me like a bit of a even better operator for my own business. And I usually coach like one or two people at a time for like a couple hours a month. It's more of like a thing I do on the side of my desk for
sure,
fun because I like it.
yeah,
So, but yeah, if anyone's interested, or and they're doing less than $3 million in revenue, because I don't want to coach people that are ahead of me, like that wouldn't make any sense. So yeah, if someone's likes my perspective, and they're doing less than $3 million in revenue, they can reach me on Twitter and shoot me a DM, and we can chat. But that's basically how that works.
Agency owners, in 2024, do you want to finally escape founder-led sales? My book, Anyone, Not Everyone, gives you a unique solution to a big problem that digital agency owners face, serving too many types of clients. In my book, I guide you through my proven 5-step process, helping you to transform from a generalist to a vertical market specialist. The best part is the methods in this book are simple, authentic, and effective. It's been endorsed by well-known author Dr. Benjamin Hardy, legendary marketer Aaron Ross, positioning expert April Dunford, gifting expert John Rulin, as well as many leading agency owners and thought leaders. So whether you're a seasoned agency owner or just getting started out, my book, Anyone, Not Everyone, is your ultimate resource to unlock your agency's potential and scale revenue. The book launches in March, and the good news is that you can go to my website right now and sign up to be notified when it launches. You'll also get access to some early bonuses just by signing up to be notified today. Go to anyoneNotEveryone.com. That's anyoneNotEveryone.com. Now back to the show. And so it's funny you mentioned Twitter. Is it still called Twitter?
It's definitely called X, but I will continue to refer to it on Twitter. I just can't make myself say X.
I didn't know if it got switched back.
Yeah, yeah.
So
it's always Twitter in my heart, So.
Yeah. So speaking of your experience, obviously you're very accomplished. You've built an amazing business, and the acquisitions really reinforce that growth for you. What, looking back now 5-6 years into this business specifically, what were some of the big sort of 10x jumps in the business itself, and what were those, and how did that happen?
So thinking about the big jumps or inflection points, I think one of them in 2019 was bringing on my first full-time employee, essentially first full-time team member, and hired a fantastic person. Kind of got lucky, I think, although I was interviewing a few different people, and I chose the right person at the end. And also it's thankful that they also applied, but in that really allowed me to get out of the fulfillment of work, essentially, have someone I could trust to. It's all right, I'll make the promises, and you, as in the sales situation, I'll make the promises, and you fulfill on them, right? Yeah. I think that's a big step for all agencies, is to have someone you can trust to fulfill on the promises that you're making on the sales seat, because it's really hard to have grow your agency, let alone have any quality of life, if you are having to ultimately be responsible for making the promises, aka doing the sales, and making sure the work is good. So that was big. I think shortly after that, I was able to not be involved in a sales call, or not be involved in a sale that closed. So got out. Basically, actually, I went away on my honeymoon with my wife to Thailand in early 2020, right before the whole
just before
C-19 situation. So yeah, just very close before. But yeah, I mean, I was out, and I just hired a salesperson. I was like, hey, I'm out, just figure it out, basically, close these deals if you can. And he did a good job. So that was great. I think coming back from 2 weeks, and this was when we were still very small then. So just 2 weeks, no issues. No one was texting me on my honeymoon. So that was good. Another big, I don't know when this was, but I remember at some point there was a situation where we obviously closed the sale without me, delivered the project without me, got a video testimonial from the happy customer without me. So to me, that was a big milestone, because that's really the whole kind of customer journey loop. It's the customer, was brought in, the customer was delivered value, the customer was so happy they would, give a video testimonial for us, and the customer has no idea who I am, really. So I think just from a pure being able to build the team, and just proud of the team that they were able to do that. That was I think that was probably like sometime in 2020. Another big milestone was launching our remote video testimonial service line in 2020, which we had to do because of COVID. So before COVID, we were only doing on-site video testimonials. And then, we kind of had to do a pivot, and just, that ended up driving a lot of growth. So it was one of those situations where it seemed like a terrible thing for the business. And it was definitely like our revenue definitely like hit a wall for like 2 months, and we were just like trying to figure it out. But, without that, we wouldn't be where were today. So it was definitely like a necessity is the mother of invention
Yeah.
situation with
Yeah.
remote video testimonials in hindsight. And then I'll say last but not least, probably like big milestone is I have 2 kids, and I've taken, well, for both 2021 and 2022 and 2023, when I took paternity leave for 45 days, everything went great. My team didn't even text me, wasn't needed. So that was probably the most recent like
Amazing.
happy milestone. I was
Yeah.
like, wow, like I feel so good about, and I'm so proud of like the team and the culture that we built. And it's hard to not be needed, but it also feels great. And it's kind of like a huge relief too, to know that, we have the right team in place and have a great general manager, a great executive team. Shout out to Dustin on VP of revenue, and Kevin, our general manager, and then, the whole leadership team, the whole company. So I think, yeah, I mean, honestly, with agencies, like it's all about the team. Like your people are your product. And the biggest inflection points have always been related to like the right people on the team. 99% of the big inflection points are like team related.
Hiring your first salesperson, I like to zoom in there because it's always a milestone for any agency owner to sort of officially step back from sales, or not, at least not be 100% required to be in sales. So, in hindsight, looking back on that first salesperson, it sounds like they were able to really fulfill the expectations that you had. You were on your honeymoon, they took care of business, you came back, they closed some deals. It sounds like. What about that hire made it successful? Like, how did you like through the lens of like speaking to the listeners, agency owners who are thinking about hiring their first salesperson, like what should they look for?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So in our situation, I think one of the, besides just having the right person in general, like what one thing that really helped in our situation was how specific and, frankly productized our offering was, especially at the time. Like we've become slightly less productized over time, but in 2020, 2019, 2020, it was like, here's what you can buy, and like here's what it costs, and very simple. So I think, and I realize that not all agencies are that productized, nor should they be necessarily. But I
Yeah.
do think it's worth recognizing that, like, you know, there are some trade-offs, and there's like a continuum that you may want to balance. Like if you want to get out of sales, faster, you may need to, at least temporarily, be more productized. And like also that can mean like leaving money on the table, because like some agencies for sure, change their pricing based on like, oh, this is like a big lead, like, well we'll charge them more, like, they can afford it. And like, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that necessarily, but like if you don't want to be involved in like the quoting process, like it's like, sometimes you have, like, we basically were like, all right, this is what it costs. Doesn't matter if we're talking to Google or if we're talking to like, you know, a small business, like this is what it's going to cost. And like, those are like simplifying the process and productizing things are trade-offs that we, made to, not have me getting text on my honeymoon around like, oh, what should I quote this? Right. It's like all laid out. The other thing I would say is like, to that point, firstly, it's like, I think, and like an ounce of productization and good positioning is worth like a pound of cure. So, it's just like having that clear positioning, like having that productization, also like social proof, right? And that's obviously, where we, from the beginning, we've always, you know, drank our own champagne and had great video testimonials. And a lot of times I think agencies don't have like hardly any social proof, or they don't, and a lot of the transference of trust, because sales is really just a transference of trust, right? But a lot of the transference of trust rests on the founder showing up and, charismatically, winning people over with founder magic.
That's it.
And if you don't have that, social proof in other forms becomes way more important. So I think, the more social proof and customer evidence that you have, the lower the bar for like the quality of the sale kind of becomes a little bit. Like you don't have to nail everything perfectly. And yeah, so I think that that's really important to think about, all of those things, like, clear positioning, productization, making it simple for the customer, and having, a lot of good social proof. And then, but lastly, I will actually say, I think it's really hard for just a like salesperson to show up and sell like an agency product or an agency service, and it often does not work. The failure rate is extremely high for a lot of reasons. I think, I'm sure, Corey, when your book comes out, anyone who reads that is gonna, be able to do it a lot better. But I think one of the things that I've seen work, this isn't what we did, but I've seen this work at other agencies, is like basically making the salesperson not like an outside like account executive hire, but a subject matter expert from an internal team, right? Because it's actually relatively easier to train someone to sell than it is to actually train them to be a subject matter expert.
Yeah.
So if I was doing it over again, or if I was in an agency that, if an agency owner is listening to this and they're saying, well, that's great, Sam, but like I'm not productized. Like I sell like very, technical, premium, ultra premium stuff. My sort of question to them would be like, is there a subject matter expert on your team that isn't you, that, is relatively good at talking with people and enjoys talking with people? And can you teach them sales while maintaining their subject matter expertise?
Yeah.
If that's the case, that's almost certainly your best option for the salesperson to help you. Because again, that teaching someone how to sell is not hard. Most of sales is just asking good questions
Yeah.
and then shutting up and letting the buyer talk. But actually having true subject matter expertise is the hard part in
Yeah.
many agencies.
Yeah. I love that advice. Yeah. And just thinking through to your point about sales, typically when you're training a new salesperson, someone who's new to sales, you have a very structured approach. You have sort of like at the bowling lane lines where you have the bumpers down the sides. Like you give them a very specific path to walk down, and they'll, once they get some competency, they can go outside of that. But that's how you set them up for success. So yeah, it's a very teachable skill. The subject matter expertise is not. I would probably add to this because I have a lens on this idea of specialization. So you mentioned how productized you are as a way to help streamline, bring a salesperson in, as well as having the social proof, make the friction in the buying process disappear as much as possible. But also having expertise in I talk a lot about a vertical market. Are a if you only do video testimonials for B2B SaaS businesses and you can speak to that at a very great depth, I think you're positioned differently in the market than a generalist who's just a video company or a marketing company who doesn't have that same level of specialization. So I think that piece helps as well.
100%. And the other thing that I would say on this sales thing is, there were a couple calls that I did with our sales representative, like where he like shadowed me, and we did stair step it out. Like I wasn't just like,
Yeah.
he started in mid-November and I went away on honeymoon in end of January, right? So he had some experience, and
Right.
I do think that is a good approach, and that's what I've sort of advocated to other agency founders, is like, first think about removing some of the lower value things of the sales process. Like map out your entire sales process, and then start to work to the point where you as the founder are still involved, but only at your highest and best use.
Yes.
And that's always, going to be actually showing up on the call and, having that conversation with the prospect, which frankly is like the best part of agency sales. It's like the worst part for founders is like when you do 4 sales calls and then you have to do 4 proposals and you have to do 4 follow-ups and you have to log it in the CRM and all of that stuff. And then it compounds because you do 4 the next day and then you're underwater. Like
Yeah.
for me, like I still choose to go on sales calls all the time with big accounts or, so, but I don't like, I'm nose in, but hands out. Like I do not take like sales homework away from calls, like in general, like, and so I'll show up, like I'll do my thing. But as soon as I leave the call, like my, whoever else, one of our salespeople who was on the call is going to run with that from there. They're going to do
Yeah.
the proposal. They're going to do the follow-ups. They're going to log in the CRM. So I think like, I do think like I am very much like pro founders getting involved in sales. I just think they should have the option, not necessarily like the requirement. And it should be,
Yeah.
obviously something that they get to like do on their own terms, right? Instead of being just like slammed in underwater.
Yeah. So you mentioned some of the big jumps in your business were your first team member, the fulfillment side, the bringing the salesperson, getting the client video testimonial of your client without you being involved in the sales and the fulfillment, everything. Love that. Bringing on remote video testimonials, as well as being able to separate and be present for your paternity leave. What would you say, looking back now, as far as the Sam 5, 6 years ago, from a like, how have you evolved personally and as a leader over these last 6 years? What are the big jumps in that, do you think?
Well, that's a really good question. I mean, I can tell first and foremost, like, I feel like the more I know about leadership, the more I realize like I have so much to learn. But I do think like one thing that comes to mind is like, I used to like, whenever I get like an idea, I used to like tell my leadership team or tell the company. And I think that's like pretty like, and I'm a guy with a ton of ideas, right? But like, that's actually not like nowadays, I very rarely share ideas unless like it's like we're going to act on them and like it's finally time to like put them in motion, because like otherwise as founders like that just becomes like distracting and like whipsawing to your team. You're just like, and then people are just like, oh well, this is another one of these ideas. So I think I'm more cognizant of like of how the double-edged sword of being that like often like very excited enthusiastic founder with a ton of ideas can be sort of disruptive, I guess. And I've in hindsight realized that like some of the ways that I like shared my ideas like were a bit disruptive like earlier in my career, and now I just try and not share them except for like have more like you know be more intentional about it, right? For example, like I have a really good idea about like where our business model needs to go, but it's like if I'm not gonna like share it offhand like in a meeting and like confuse people. Like I'm just it's like we can wait on that. So like that's one thing I think. The other thing I would say is, wow, this is such a good question. I mean, I think it's in general more. I like to like this is something I've learned like over the past 2 or 3 years. But like if someone asks me a question, I like to flip it back to them and I'm like, well, what do you think we should do? And then most of the time I'll just be like, all right, yeah, let's do that. So I think like a lot of times, and then that's very, I think that's just like a good, very simple thing to do, because it's like
Yeah.
one, the person who's asking you usually has the best answer. They're usually closest to the problem. Two, it's very empowering for your team to, work in that capacity. So I think that's good. And I encourage my entire leadership team and really everyone in the company to do that. And I think we've done a pretty good job adopting that. Another thing I would say, yeah, I don't know that there's so much. I'm trying to think. There's one any other like transformational
Yeah.
ones. Yeah, I think like
Okay. Go
yeah.
ahead.
So I think we've like kind of this is an interesting one, but like we've kind of gotten over the course. I've gotten like less rigid around like meeting stuff, but with the goal of having like more productive meetings. Like I think there's this really good like Jeff Bezos quote where he's like, I like a crisp agenda, but like a messy meeting. And we're still working on the crisp agenda part,
Yeah.
but like we've definitely embraced like, messy meetings, as
Nice.
long as they're like very productive, right? And
Right.
like we're
Yeah. You're
actually
going
making
somewhere.
decisions. Yeah. And it's like I feel like in, prior years or younger in my career, it's like very rigid on like, oh, this is like what the meeting agenda needs to be. We have to always like follow these
Right.
steps.
Yep. We got 15-minute increments. We got to
Yeah.
get through this agenda
Yeah.
item. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. But sometimes in like we actually have one meeting. We have and there it is important to have those meetings. Like there are, but I
Yeah.
think I
Yeah.
think not
Stand
a
up
lot of
meetings,
people.
whatnot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
not a lot of people make room for there's like less unstructured meetings where it's like, all right, everyone put a bullet point in, or like if you have something, and we're just gonna go through like these 3 or 4 bullet points that are like the most top of mind for everyone. Like some of our best decisions like come out of those like pretty unstructured but important meetings.
Yeah. Well, gosh, we're ending another episode here, and I'm like, just feel like we're getting started. So maybe we'll have to do this again sometime. But Sam, where can people reach out to you to connect and learn more about and how to work with you if they want to?
Absolutely. So if you're interested in anything customer stories, video testimonials, written case studies, testimonialhero.com. You can also follow me on Twitter or X, as the kids call it, right? It's at Sam Shepler. I share more like entrepreneurship and agency content on Twitter. And then I'm also on LinkedIn too, more sharing testimonial hero stuff, talking about customer stories and how to best use them to build trust and drive revenue.
Beautiful. Sam, thanks again for coming on the show.
Thanks, Corey. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
That's it for today. I'm Corey Quinn, and I hope you join me again next time on the Deep Specialization Podcast. If you received value from this show, please go to Apple Podcasts and leave us a review. Thanks, and we'll see you soon.